My name is Victoria Brennan, and this is the story of how a surprise visit to my husband's office, a violent confrontation with a woman who thought she had power, and one signature on a stack of documents brought an empire crashing down, leaving two people who betrayed me with absolutely nothing. I'm 47 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas, in a beautiful home in the Westlake Hills area with a view of the city skyline. I've been married to my husband Richard for 23 years, or at least I thought I was happily married until 6 months ago when small, nagging inconsistencies started adding up to a picture I didn't want to see. Richard and I met in business school at UT Austin. I was getting my MBA in finance and he was studying entrepreneurship. We were both ambitious, both driven, both determined to build something meaningful. We fell in love over late night study sessions, shared dreams of success, and a mutual understanding that we were partners in every sense of the word. After graduation, Richard had a brilliant idea for a tech consulting firm that would help traditional businesses adapt to digital transformation. It was 2001, right when companies were scrambling to modernize, and his timing was perfect. There was just one problem. Richard had the vision and the charisma, but he didn't have the capital or the business acumen to actually build the infrastructure. That's where I came in. I had a small inheritance from my grandmother, $150,000, that I'd been carefully investing. I also had the financial expertise to structure the business properly, the connections from my internships to secure our first clients, and the operational skills to actually run a company while Richard focused on sales and vision. We founded Brennan Digital Solutions together. But here's the critical detail that would become important 23 years later. The business was registered solely in my name. It was my lawyer's recommendation. Since my money was funding the startup, having it in my name protected my investment and offered certain tax advantages. Richard didn't care about paperwork details. He was too excited about building his dream. He signed off on everything without even reading it. "You handle the boring stuff, babe," he'd said with a grin. "I'll bring in the clients and make us rich." And he did. Richard was a phenomenal salesman. He could walk into a boardroom and have executives eating out of his hand within minutes. He landed major contracts with companies across Texas, then nationally. The business grew rapidly, from just the two of us working out of our apartment to a staff of 50 employees and offices in downtown Austin. But while Richard was the face of the company, I was its backbone. I managed the finances, hired and trained staff, ensured projects were delivered on time, handled all legal compliance, negotiated contracts, and built the operational systems that allowed us to scale. Richard would seal the deals. I'd make sure we could actually deliver on his promises. Over 23 years, Brennan Digital Solutions grew into a $50 million company. We employed over 200 people across 3 offices. We owned the building in downtown Austin, where our headquarters were located, a beautiful 10-story glass structure that I'd personally overseen the purchase and renovation of. We had investments, assets, real estate holdings, all carefully structured and managed by me and our CFO, whom I'd hired 12 years ago. Richard and I had a good life. No children. We decided early on to focus on the business, but a beautiful home, financial security, respect in the Austin business community, and what I thought was a solid partnership both in business and in marriage. Then 6 months ago, things started to feel off. Richard was traveling more, claiming new client pitches required extensive face time. He was on his phone constantly, texting and smiling at messages in ways that felt secretive. He started going to the gym more, bought new clothes, seemed more concerned with his appearance than he'd been in years. The classic signs looking back, but I was busy running a company and trusted my husband of over 2 decades. I pushed the suspicions aside, told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of a major expansion we were planning was making me see problems where there weren't any. Then one Friday afternoon, I decided to surprise Richard at the office. I'd been working from home that week, handling some sensitive financial projections for our board meeting, but I finished early and thought it would be nice to swing by his office, maybe take him out for an early dinner, reconnect a little. I should mention that while the company was in my name, Richard had an impressive office setup. He was CEO in title and function as far as clients and most employees were concerned. I was listed as founder and CFO, handling the financial and operational side. Most people in the company knew we were married, but we maintained professional boundaries at work. Richard's office was on the 10th floor, the executive level. He had a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, the works, as a successful CEO should have. I'd never begrudged him that. He'd earned it with his sales success, and good optics mattered in business. I arrived at the building around 3 o'clock on that Friday afternoon. I parked in my reserved spot in the garage, marked V. Brennan, founder, and took the elevator to the 10th floor. I was wearing a casual outfit, jeans, and a nice blouse, carrying my laptop bag. I hadn't told Richard I was coming, that was the point of a surprise. The executive floor was quieter than the bustling lower floors. Thick carpet, muted lighting, the hush of serious money and power. I walked down the hall toward Richard's office, smiling at a few employees who recognized me and looked surprised to see me. Richard's assistant, James, wasn't at his desk outside Richard's office, probably on a break or running an errand. The door to Richard's office was closed, which was unusual for a Friday afternoon. Richard usually kept it open to seem accessible. I reached for the handle, and that's when I heard it: laughter. A woman's laughter, low and intimate, followed by Richard's voice, equally warm and familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. I opened the door without knocking. The scene wasn't what you might expect. No one was half undressed or in a compromising position. But it was intimate in a worse way. Richard was behind his desk, and a woman I didn't recognize was perched on the edge of it, facing him, her body language screaming familiarity and possession. She was young, mid-30s at most, with long dark hair, expensive clothes, and a confidence that came from someone who felt secure in her position. They both looked up as I entered. Richard's face went through a rapid progression of emotions: surprise, guilt, panic, and then a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Victoria, I didn't know you were coming by." The woman's reaction was different. She looked me up and down with an expression of barely concealed disdain, taking in my casual outfit, my lack of makeup, my comfortable shoes. Then she looked at Richard with raised eyebrows as if to say, "This is your wife." "Who's this?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. "This is Melissa Torres," Richard said quickly, standing up. "Our new VP of Client Relations. I hired her 3 months ago." "Melissa, this is my wife, Victoria." Melissa slid off the desk with a languid movement and extended her hand, her smile sharp and condescending. "Oh, you're the wife. Richard's told me so much about you." I shook her hand, noting the overly firm grip, the way she held on just a second too long, the way her eyes challenged me. "Strange, he hasn't mentioned you at all." Her smile widened. "Well, I'm new to the executive team." "I'm sure Richard didn't want to bore you with work details." There was something in her tone, in the way she said "work details," that made it clear she considered me an outsider, a CEO's spouse who didn't understand the demands of the business, someone peripheral. "I'm familiar with our executive team," I said coolly. "I don't recall approving a VP of Client Relations hire." "It was a quick decision," Richard interjected. "We needed someone immediately for the Henderson account. Melissa came highly recommended." "By whom, and what's her compensation package?" Melissa's smile faltered slightly. She clearly wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by what she perceived as just the boss's wife stopping by the office. "Victoria, we can discuss this later," Richard said, a warning note in his voice. "Melissa and I were just finishing up a strategy session." On her sitting on your desk, the air in the room went cold. Melissa's eyes flashed with something ugly, anger mixed with satisfaction. She'd been caught but didn't care. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it. "I should let you two talk," Melissa said, but she didn't move toward the door. Instead, she touched Richard's arm, a casual, possessive gesture. "Richard, we'll continue this discussion Monday. Have a good weekend." She walked past me toward the door, and as she did, she deliberately bumped my shoulder, not hard enough to be unambiguous assault, but hard enough to be unmistakably intentional. A power move, a claim of territory. I turned to face her, and that's when she made her critical mistake. "You know," Melissa said, stopping in the doorway and turning back to look at me, "you really should call before visiting. Richard's very busy, and having random interruptions doesn't help productivity. Maybe next time you could just text him first." The audacity of this woman, this employee, this mistress, telling me how to interact with my own husband in my own company was breathtaking. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I'm just saying," Melissa continued, clearly emboldened by what she perceived as Richard's support and my shock, "that successful executives need boundaries, even from family. You wouldn't just walk into a client meeting, right? Richard's time is valuable." "Melissa," Richard started, but she wasn't done. "I mean, I get it," she said, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "You're probably lonely, not being involved in the business anymore. But Richard and I have important work to do, and we can't have." I don't even know what she was about to say next because she made her second critical mistake. She reached out and put her hand on my chest, actually physically pushed me backward, just slightly, a gesture meant to move me out of her way so she could leave. The moment her hand made contact with me, something crystallized in my mind. This woman, this interloper, had put her hands on me in my own building, in my own company, while sleeping with my husband. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push back. I simply pulled out my phone and said, "That was assault. You just assaulted me. Richard, you saw that, didn't you?" Melissa laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, please, I barely touched you. Don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being precise. You intentionally made unwanted physical contact with me in a hostile manner. That's assault, and you did it in front of a witness." "Richard," Melissa turned to him, clearly expecting him to tell me to calm down, to smooth things over. But Richard was staring at me with an expression I'd seen before, the expression he got when he realized he'd miscalculated badly in a business deal. "Victoria, let's all just take a breath." "No," I said calmly. "I don't think we will." "Melissa, you're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out of the building. You have 30 minutes to clear your personal belongings from your office." Melissa's face went from smug to shocked in seconds. "You can't fire me. I'm not even what? I'm not even important here. I'm not even involved in the business." I pulled out my phone again and pulled up the company registration documents I always kept in my cloud storage. "Let me clarify something for you, Melissa. This company, Brennan Digital Solutions, is registered in my name, solely in my name. I am the founder, the owner, and the person who signs every paycheck, including yours. Richard is CEO because I allow him to be CEO, and you are fired because you assaulted the owner of this company." The color drained from Melissa's face. She looked at Richard desperately. "Richard, tell her she can't do this." Richard said nothing. He just stood there, frozen, realizing that the house of cards he'd built was starting to collapse. "Richard," Melissa's voice had gone from confident to panicked. "You said you told me that you—" "What did he tell you, Melissa?" I asked, genuinely curious now. "That he owned the company, that I was just his wife who didn't understand business, that he was going to leave me and the two of you would run this empire together." Her face confirmed everything. "Security," I said into my phone, dialing the extension for our building security chief. "This is Victoria Brennan. I need 2 officers to the 10th floor, Richard's office, immediately. We have a terminated employee who needs to be escorted out." "You're crazy," Melissa hissed at me, her sophisticated facade completely gone. "Richard, are you going to let her do this?" Richard finally found his voice. "Victoria, please, let's discuss this privately. Melissa, maybe you should just go home for the day and we'll figure this out on Monday." "There's nothing to figure out," I said. "She assaulted me. She's fired. And as for you, Richard, you and I need to have a very serious conversation about the future of your employment here as well." Melissa made one last desperate attempt. She turned back to me, her voice turning vicious. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think having your name on some papers makes you powerful? Richard built this company. He's the one clients respect. He's the one who brings in millions of dollars. You're just the bean counter who hides behind spreadsheets." "If I'm just a bean counter," I replied calmly, "then you won't mind when those spreadsheets show that your salary of $185,000, which I did not approve, by the way, and which is about $60,000 more than our other VPs make, will be your last paycheck from this company." Security arrived, 2 large men in suits who knew me well. "Ms. Brennan, please escort Ms. Torres to her office. Allow her to collect only personal belongings, no files, no electronics, no documents. Then escort her from the building. She is not permitted to return." Melissa looked at Richard one last time, clearly hoping he'd intervene. He didn't. He just stood there, watching his mistress being escorted away, his face ashen. When the door closed behind them, leaving Richard and me alone in his office, the silence was deafening. "How long?" I asked Victoria. "How long?" He sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 50 years. 6 months. It started at a conference in Dallas. It was stupid. It was a mistake I never meant for it to become. She thought she was moving in here permanently, didn't she? She thought you were going to leave me and the two of you were going to run this company together." He didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Did you tell her you own the company, Richard? Did you let her believe that you had the power to make her a partner, to build a future with her here?" "I might have implied certain things. You lied to her, just like you've been lying to me. I love you, Victoria. This thing with Melissa, it was just, don't." I held up my hand. "Don't insult me by claiming this was just physical. I saw the way you two looked at each other. I heard the intimacy in your voices. And the fact that you hired her, gave her an executive position without my approval, inflated her salary. You were building a life with her, Richard, in my company." He dropped his head into his hands. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to go home. I'm going to call our lawyer, and then you and I are going to have a very detailed conversation about what happens next. But first, you're going to tell me something honestly. Were you planning to leave me?" The pause before he answered told me everything, but I needed to hear it. I don't know, maybe. Melissa was exciting. She made me feel young again. She didn't treat me like just a partner in a business arrangement. She made me feel like I was important for me, not for what I provided. I see. So our 23-year marriage, our partnership that built this company from nothing, the fact that I've stood by you through every challenge, that was just a business arrangement to you. That's not what I meant, but it's what you said. And you know what, Richard? You're right. We are in a business arrangement, and that business is mine. You've been operating under my authority for 23 years, and you forgot that. You let your ego and your midlife crisis make you forget who actually has the power here. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Don't come home tonight. Check into a hotel. Have your lawyer call my lawyer on Monday. We'll discuss the terms of your departure from both the company and the marriage. Victoria, please, one more thing. You might want to check your employment contract, the one you signed when we formalized the corporate structure 10 years ago. There's a clause about termination for cause. I'm pretty sure hiring your mistress and inflating her salary without board approval qualifies. I left him sitting in his office, in the building I owned, in the company I built, and for the first time in 6 months, I felt clarity. The next week was a hurricane of legal activity. I hired the best divorce attorney in Austin, a woman named Catherine Walsh who had a reputation for absolutely demolishing unfaithful spouses in court. I also called an emergency board meeting with our CFO, our general counsel, and our 3 independent board members. The board meeting was enlightening. Our general counsel, Thomas Chen, confirmed what I already knew: the company was solely in my name. Richard was an employee, a well-compensated, high-ranking employee with the title of CEO, but legally just an employee. His employment contract included a termination clause for violations of company policy, including undisclosed conflicts of interest and unauthorized hiring decisions. The Melissa Torres hire is particularly problematic, Thomas said, reviewing the documents. She was hired at a VP level without board approval, which Richard's contract required for any position above director level. Her salary was set significantly above comparable positions. And based on the timeline you've provided, she was hired during the period when Richard was having an affair with her, which represents a clear conflict of interest and potential sexual harassment liability for the company. Our CFO, Diane Martinez, was furious when she learned the details. I can't believe he did this. Victoria, you built this company. We all know that. Richard's good at sales, but you're the reason we're still in business. Every time he overpromised to a client, you figured out how to deliver. Every financial crisis, you navigated us through. This is your company. The board unanimously voted to terminate Richard's employment for cause, effective immediately. He would receive no severance, no stock options, nothing beyond his accrued vacation pay. The termination letter was delivered by courier to his hotel room. The divorce proceedings were uglier. Richard hired an aggressive attorney who tried to argue that despite the company being in my name, Richard's contributions over 23 years entitled him to half the business value. They also tried to claim that the business had been a joint venture from the start, and my name being on the documents was just a formality. Catherine Walsh destroyed those arguments methodically. She produced the original business plan. The bank statements showing my grandmother's inheritance as the sole startup capital, the corporate documents Richard had signed without reading the employment contract he'd executed 10 years ago that clearly established him as an employee rather than a partner, and most damningly, email communications between Richard and Melissa discussing how they would restructure the company once they were running it together. Your client, Catherine told Richard's lawyer during a particularly heated negotiation session, treated my client's company as his personal dating pool and planned to effectively steal it with his mistress. He's lucky my client is only divorcing him and not pressing charges for attempted corporate fraud. In the end, Richard walked away with exactly what he'd contributed to the marriage: nothing. He got half of our home equity. The house had been purchased with joint marital funds, but no stake in the business, no ongoing payments, nothing. Texas is a community property state, but Catherine successfully argued that my premarital investment, the fact that my name was solely on all corporate documents, and Richard's misconduct constituted sufficient grounds to exclude the business from community property division. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd clearly seen too many men try to claim credit for their wives' success, was not sympathetic to Richard's claims. Mr. Brennan, she said during the final hearing, you spent 23 years as the face of a company your wife built. You enjoyed the prestige, the salary, the respect that came from being CEO of a successful firm. And when you decided to have an affair, you chose to do it with a subordinate, which exposed the company to liability. You then plan to push out the actual owner in favor of your mistress. The court finds that you have no claim to Brennan Digital Solutions beyond the salary you were paid during your employment. This divorce is granted on the grounds of adultery. The business remains solely with Ms. Brennan. 6 months after that Friday afternoon when I walked into Richard's office, I sat in my own office. I'd taken over the corner office after Richard's termination, looking out at the Austin skyline. Brennan Digital Solutions was restructured with me as CEO, Diane Martinez elevated to President and COO, and a new VP of Client Relations hired through a proper search process. We'd lost a few clients initially when Richard left. Some were loyal to him personally, but we'd gained even more as word spread that the company was under new leadership. Turned out a lot of potential clients had been hesitant to work with us because they found Richard's salesman persona off-putting. They preferred dealing with me directly. The company's revenue actually increased 15% in the first year after Richard's departure. As for Melissa Torres, she sued the company for wrongful termination. Her lawyer argued that she'd been fired due to her relationship with Richard, which they tried to paint as retaliation. Catherine Walsh, who I'd retained as corporate counsel, destroyed that claim by demonstrating that Melissa had been fired for assault, that her hire itself had been improper, and that her inflated salary and rapid promotion constituted evidence of sexual harassment, creating a hostile work environment, not for Melissa, but for all our other employees who'd been passed over in favor of the CEO's mistress. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. Melissa ended up settling our countersuit by agreeing to pay the company $50,000 and signing an NDA. Last I heard, she'd left Austin entirely. Richard tried to start his own consulting firm, leveraging his industry connections. It failed within a year. Turned out that without me building the operational infrastructure, handling the finances, and ensuring quality delivery, Richard was just a salesman with no product to sell. His reputation in the Austin business community was also permanently damaged. Word had spread about the affair, the attempted corporate theft, the improper hiring practices. He remarried quickly, a woman he met at a networking event, someone young and impressed by his stories of past success. I wished them well, genuinely. My anger had faded into indifference. I'm now 50 years old, 3 years after that pivotal Friday. I'm still running Brennan Digital Solutions, which is now valued at over $80 million. I'm dating someone new, a lawyer I met through Catherine, someone who respects my intelligence and independence, who built his own career and isn't threatened by my success. I think sometimes about that moment when Melissa put her hand on my chest, that physical push that was meant to put me in my place, to remind me that I was just the wife, peripheral to the real action. She had no idea that her contempt for me, her assumption that Richard had the power, her physical assault on someone she viewed as powerless, all of it was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who owned what. Richard had spent 23 years enjoying the fruits of my labor, my investment, my intelligence, and my work. He'd convinced himself, and apparently everyone around him, that he was the power behind Brennan Digital Solutions. He'd forgotten, or maybe never truly understood, that the entire company existed because of me. And Melissa, who'd bet her career on a man who she thought controlled an empire, learned the hard way that you should always know who really owns the business before you start pushing people around. My advice to anyone in business, especially women: keep your name on your assets. Understand the legal structures of everything you own, and never assume that the person with the impressive title in the corner office is the person with the actual power. Sometimes the real power is quieter, working behind the scenes, building the foundation that everyone else is standing on. And when someone puts their hands on you, when someone disrespects you in your own space, remember, paperwork is power, signatures are power, ownership is power, and knowing exactly what you own and control, that's the power that can't be taken away by charm or charisma or someone else's confidence. Richard thought he was the king of an empire. Melissa thought she was going to be queen, but neither of them bothered to check who actually owned the castle, and in the end, that made all the difference. Did you like my story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If this story resonated with you, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.